in the western part of North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Mountains fold into one another beneath dense forests and winding roads, there is a ridge known as Brown Mountain. During the day, it looks quiet, remote, almost ordinary. But for more than a century, people standing along the overlooks near the mountain have reported strange lights appearing in the darkness. Small, glowing orbs, sometimes white, sometimes orange, hovering above the tree line before drifting silently through the valley below. Witnesses have described the lights moving against the wind, splitting into multiple shapes, vanishing without a sound, and then returning again, hours later. Some believed they were lanterns carried by spirits. Others claimed they were caused by unusual atmospheric conditions. And over the years, investigators, scientists, tourists, ghost hunters, and local residents all arrived at the same goal: to explain what was happening above Brown Mountain. Most left without an answer. And even now, despite decades of study, the lights continue to appear. Tonight, we're looking at the long history of the Brown Mountain Lights, the sightings that made the phenomenon famous, and the uneasy space between folklore and science that still surrounds the mountain today. Brown Mountain sits within the Pigsa National Forest, not far from the town of Morganton. The region is steep, heavily wooded, and often covered in layers of mist that settle into the valleys after sunset. Roads curve sharply through the mountains. Cell service disappears in certain areas. At night, visibility can become extremely limited. But for generations, local communities treated the mountains with a certain level of caution and respect. Long before modern reports emerged, stories circulated among the settlers and indigenous communities describing mysterious lights moving through the wilderness after dark. One of the most repeated legends involves warriors searching the mountain with torches after a battle. Another tells of grieving spirits wandering the valley. The stories change depending on who told them, but the central detail remained the same: lights in the darkness. And eventually, those stories moved beyond folklore, because in the early 20th century, sightings began appearing in newspapers. The Brown Mountain Lights gained national attention in the early 1900s. In 1913, a local newspaper described strange, glowing lights appearing repeatedly above the mountain ridge. The article spread quickly. Soon, travelers began visiting the overlooks, hoping to witness the phenomenon themselves. Many did. Witnesses consistently described lights hovering low in the valley before rising upward and fading into the distance. Some reports claimed the lights pulsed rhythmically. Others said they darted suddenly from side to side. One observer compared them to railroad lanterns suspended in midair. Another insisted they resembled floating stars beneath the mountain fog. And perhaps, most unsettling of all, the lights rarely behaved the same way twice. As public interest grew, explanations started appearing almost immediately. Some believed moonlight reflected off train tracks in the distance. Others blamed automobile headlights winding through mountain roads. But even in the early years, locals pushed back against those theories. Many residents were deeply familiar with the landscape. They understood where the roads were located, They knew the train routes, and they insisted the lights often appeared in places where no vehicle or railroad could possibly exist. That disagreement would continue for decades. By the 1920s, the mystery had become so widely discussed that the federal government eventually became involved. In 1922, investigators from the United States Geological Survey traveled to the region to study the lights directly. Their lead investigator was a geologist named George Mansfield. Mansfield spent time interviewing witnesses, observing the mountain, and documenting environmental conditions. His conclusion was straightforward. He believed the majority of the sightings could be explained by ordinary light sources, specifically train headlights, campfires, automobile lights, and atmospheric distortion. According to Mansfield, temperature inversions and mountain fog could magnify and distort distant lights, making them appear suspended above the valley. The report was intended to settle the matter. Instead, it intensified the debates, because shortly after the findings were published, residents argued that the investigation failed to account for numerous sightings occurring in isolated areas with no visible roads or railways. Some claimed investigators observed the mountain only briefly. Others believed the government simply wanted a convenient explanation. And over time, the official report became part of the legend itself. Not because it solved the mystery, but because many people felt it did not. One reason the Brown Mountain Lights remain famous for so long is the consistency of certain witness descriptions across generations. Even people unfamiliar with the legend often reported similar experiences. A typical sighting unfolded quietly. Observers would arrive at one of the overlooks around sunset. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then, somewhere beyond the tree line, a faint glow would emerge. Sometimes it looked stationary. Other times it drifted slowly upward before hovering in place. Witnesses frequently described the lights as strangely silent. No engine noise. No crackling fire. No obvious source. And then, without warning, the glow would dim and disappear completely, only to reappear somewhere else moments later. In one frequently discussed account from the 1960s, a group of college students claimed they watched two orange lights circle each other above the valley for nearly 15 minutes. One student later described the movement as deliberate. Another admitted they initially assumed it was an aircraft until the light suddenly stopped moving altogether. Then both lights vanished simultaneously. No sound followed, no aircraft appeared overhead, and according to the witnesses, the valley below remained completely dark. Another report came from a local couple driving through the mountains late at night during the 1970s. They claimed a pale white light appeared alongside their vehicle through the trees before pacing them for several minutes. The driver later said the light seemed aware of the car. Eventually, the glow drifted deeper into the woods and disappeared. The couple reportedly avoided the road at night afterward. As decades passed, the Brown Mountain Lights transformed from a regional mystery into a tourist attraction. Observation areas were established. Guidebooks mentioned the phenomenon. TV programs featured the story repeatedly. And each new generation brought renewed interest. By the 1990s and early 2000s, paranormal investigators began arriving with cameras, electromagnetic sensors, and recording equipment. Most captured very little, but occasionally strange footage emerged. Blurry glowing shapes, lights flickering above distant ridges, unexplained flashes appearing briefly before fading into darkness. Skeptics argued the recordings proved nothing, and in many cases, they were probably right. Low-light photography in mountainous terrain can easily produce misleading images, but the uncertainty surrounding the footage only added to the atmosphere around the mountain. Because even when evidence appeared to be inconclusive, people continued seeing the lights with their own eyes. Several modern witnesses describe a similar emotional reaction after observing the lights. Not terror, not panic, but a quiet sense that something feels slightly wrong. One travel writer who visited the overlook in autumn described waiting nearly 2 hours before seeing anything unusual. Then, just after midnight, a dim orange glow appeared beneath the fog layer. At first, the writer assumed it was a distant vehicle, but the light remained perfectly still. Then it rose vertically, slowly, without wavering, and hovering several seconds. It disappeared completely. The writer later admitted the experience felt difficult to explain, not because it looked supernatural, but because it moved in a way that didn't seem natural. Another witness described seeing 3 lights appear simultaneously across separate sections of the valley. 2 faded quickly. The third remained visible for nearly 10 minutes. According to the report, the light gradually changed color from pale yellow to deep orange before vanishing. No explanation was ever confirmed. Despite the mystery surrounding the Brown Mountain Lights, scientists have continued offering possible explanations over the years. Some researchers point to atmospheric plasma. Others suggest swamp gas, though critics argue the terrain doesn't support the theory particularly well. Temperature inversions remain one of the most widely accepted explanations. Under certain conditions, layers of warm and cool air can bend light over long distances, distorting its appearance dramatically. This phenomenon can make ordinary lights appear elevated, floating, or strangely mobile. There's also the issue of perspective. Mountain valleys create unusual visual effects at night. Distances become difficult to judge. Stationary lights can appear to move when viewed through shifting fog or uneven terrain. And once a legend becomes famous, expectation itself can shape perception. People arrive hoping to see something unusual, and the human brain naturally searches for patterns in the darkness. Still, even researchers who support rational explanations sometimes admit that not every report fits neatly into a category. Some sightings occurred before modern roads even existed nearby. Others involved unusual movement patterns difficult to explain through simple reflection alone. That uncertainty is part of what keeps the mystery alive. Naturally, paranormal theories followed closely behind the sightings. Some believe the lights are spiritual in nature, ghost lanterns, lost souls, residual energy connected to tragedy or death. Others connect the phenomenon to indigenous folklore surrounding the mountains. There are also more modern interpretations. Extraterrestrial theories became especially popular during the UFO wave of the 1960s and 70s. A few witnesses claimed the lights behaved intelligently, reacting to movement or changing direction suddenly. However, no credible evidence has ever confirmed any supernatural or extraterrestrial explanation, and even many believers admit the mystery may ultimately have an ordinary cause that simply hasn't been fully understood yet. But perhaps that's why the story continues to endure, because the lights exist in a space where certainty never fully arrives. Today, visitors still travel to Brown Mountain Overlook, hoping to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Some leave disappointed. Others claim they see lights within minutes. Online forums contain hundreds of personal accounts. Many are probably misidentified aircraft, distant vehicles, or atmospheric distortions. But not all witnesses agree on what they experience. And over the years, one detail appears again and again and again in the descriptions. Silence. The lights rarely arrive with sound. They simply appear, hover, drift, then vanish back into the darkness surrounding the mountain. Perhaps there is a scientific explanation that fully accounts for every sighting. Perhaps multiple explanations exist simultaneously. Or perhaps some part of the phenomenon still remains undiscovered. More than 100 years after the first major reports, the Brown Mountain lights continue to resist a single definitive answer. And maybe that uncertainty is what keeps people returning, standing quietly along the overlook after midnight, watching the valleys beneath the mountains, waiting for something strange to appear in the dark. The most unsettling mysteries are often the quiet ones, not dramatic hauntings or terrifying encounters, but small, persistent events that continue just beyond explanation. The Brown Mountain lights have survived generations of skepticism, investigation, folklore, and fascination. And despite advances in technology, despite scientific studies, and up-to-date technology, people still report seeing them. Small drifting lights moving silently through the valleys of western North Carolina. Maybe they're reflections, maybe they're atmospheric distortions, or maybe some mysteries remain compelling precisely because they never fully resolved. And somewhere beyond the trees of Brown Mountain, the lights still appear. And for now, no one can say with complete certainty why. Some stories don't ask to be remembered. They wait. If you're still here, it's already too late. This has been Diamonds After Dark. See you next time.